Joining us today on Brownfield Ag News is Dr. Kess Berg, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Advanced Agrilytics. Dr. Berg, how are you doing here today?
Doing well, Brett. Hope you're doing as well.
Absolutely. And Dr. Berg, Advanced Agrilytics is focused on the environment first approach in our previous conversations here. With harvest underway in many locations, how does that come into play this time of the year? And what are some observations that can be made from the combine cab?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I mean, when we talk about environment, and even through, some of the previous conversations you've had with our folks, is really understanding what drives yield, really spatially or within a field. And we arbitrarily, or I shouldn't say arbitrarily, but we separate environment water limited, meaning water is being shed from that area, probably lower in organic matter, higher in elevation, probably a CEC around 10 to 12, maybe even a little bit less, but it's going to be water limited. Then we have that saturated acre. It's got a lot of catchment and really higher organic matter, probably greater than 3, maybe greater than 4%, CEC of upwards of 20. And water is going to that acre, and whether it goes away or not, we have to understand that. And so as we think about managing, we really need to think about what is each acre going to undergo throughout a growing season. We know that the weather is different each growing season, but how do we de-risk those situations? And I think all of that plays into a part of what we see at this particular time frame. As we look at, that water limited acre here in Northeast Indiana, along with many different environments or geographies that we manage, really, we were without water for the greatest degree of June. And now over the last 20, 30 days, we've been really water limited as well during grain fill or the last part of grain fill. And so what do we do about that? How would we approach that? And so in that particular environment, seeding rate is one, but how do we manage nitrogen? When we plant, that is the only time that we absolutely know we're going to have enough moisture to move nutrients to that plant. And so on those acres, not only are we lesser in seeding rate, but we have to be increased in nitrogen. How do we drive yield? Get to canopy in 30 to 45 days, because after that, the probability we're going to run out of water is getting higher. On that saturated acre, or let's say the stable acre, we don't have to be as proactive up front. Obviously, we want to get to canopy as quickly as possible, but we're closer to the water table because we're lower in elevation. We've got more organic matter. We've got more, I'm going to say, attributes going for us. And so as we look at it this particular year, how do we stabilize yield across those two? We know that that stable environment, or the environment that kind of takes care of itself, is going to be really good year in, year out. Now, what about that water limited acre? Have we made sure that that plant is growing and really dies on its own terms? We can see the crop here behind me. If that husk to nest first, we know that that plant has died on its own terms. We've de-risked that situation. We've given it everything that it needed to get to really physiological maturity. And so all of those things together, as you're looking at the combine cab, how do you really take a gauge of that? I know when I'm running the combine, I'm obviously looking at plant structure and really ear size and how that's going to really feed, whether it's lodged or not. But also when you open up a land and you look across the land at that rise in elevation, and it may only be 5, 6 feet or upwards of 20 feet. When you look across that opened up land and the next pass that you're going to make, how green is it, or how is the evenness of greening of that canopy as it goes up the knob and it comes back down? If it's not green on top of that knob, what could we have done different? And we need to think about next year at that point.
What would you say has held growers back from adopting this spatial insight in their management strategies more broadly?
Well, I think there's a couple things. It's understanding what is the driver of yield. I myself, we went through, I'm aging myself now, but we went through the 90s to where we had yield maps in the late 90s and early 2000s, and we kept coming back to what is the yield limiting factor. And, we would go towards soil type or maybe even moisture. We might get there, higher elevation. But really, how do we start to predict that? How do we understand it? And what do we drive against it? I talked a little bit about driving towards canopy on that water limited acre. But that's really what we need to do. But what is the cause? As that plant starts to grow, we get sunlight into that canopy, and we know that the moisture that plant takes up is probably 70 to 80% utilized for cooling. When we run out of moisture, we start to get a warmer crop. Now your photosynthesis starts to get late or gets less efficient. And so all of those things contribute to a lesser bundle, or let's say total, of stored carbohydrate to go into that ear. So even we have limitations early on, but we didn't understand what was really the cause. And it was that soil heating and then that desiccation of the leaf on the underside of that leaf. But we didn't understand that. Also, when we think about that saturated acre, the grower will know, our growers know, where is it wet? Where is it dry? But seriously, where do we need to go and really put in tile? But how do we predict really that amplitude? And it's not only the wetness, but it's the soil structure in those particular areas. We may not build a great seed bed, and that may be the cause of less plant population and less yield. So we understand outcome. Yield is that outcome. But what has kept the grower in really understanding and utilizing this is the practitioner to understand what are the key levers to pull during the growing season in a spatial nature.
And could you also talk about just how pivotal this time of the year is to help growers, make those decisions for 2024 for the next year?
Yeah, Brent, it's incredible. Even in the month of August, what I would tell our folks and what I do myself is we try to come up with hypotheses. What are the hypotheses that is causing yield to deflect in areas? And what can we do about it in that following year? So those hypotheses, as we travel through the grain fill period and understand what that fill time is, and here we've got about 60% milk line to go. We're still taking a very close look at how this crop matures and really how it finishes. But all of these things now are really how are we going to guide for next year? Do we have plant populations issues, kind of like what I talked about with seedbed prep and how we're planting that seed? Or have we not gotten the canopy quick enough? And then as we think about R1 and really look at those stored reserves in the bottom of that stalk, have we done our job on each one of the environments to make as much stored reserve as we can so that when we go into grain fill, we have cloudy days or we have rainy days, which would have been good. But really that cloudy, hot day, we're not going to have really good photosynthesis. It's got to use from the stalk. And so understanding that even today, and how you want to push that crop during those vegetative stages, those are key factors.
Great information here today, Dr. Berg. And before you go, you might tell us where you're speaking to us from and what the crop conditions are like your way.
Yeah, I'm just south of Huntington, Indiana, about 5 miles is where we're filming this today. And really, we planted in that late May time frame. Like many of our geographies, we were, really water limited, rainfall limited in the month of June. But we were lucky enough to get some good rainfall in July and early August, and now I've gone through another dry period. We're starting to see this crop finesse or mature fairly rapidly because of some of the dry, some of just the timing. But we're still probably 20 days again from that physiological maturity of corn, 50%, maybe 60% milk line. Soybeans on the other stage is really, it's starting to come along as well. Starting to finesse, you're starting to see some leaves drop. I would imagine folks will get into the field in the next 10 days or so. But as we look at the crop specifically, I've been relatively pleased at what that grain fill and kernel size is. We always think about counting kernels and looking at length and things of that nature, but we really want to get to that girth and understanding that kernel size and really what makes yield. And as we look at some of the crop that even I have behind me, and I know I'm on an outside row, so it's not particularly fair, we're getting to a fairly good kernel size on these ears. and even in the middle of the field to where our divisor number when we're calculating out yield or hand shelling is going to be a fairly small number.
Well, we're excited to see how things develop throughout harvest. How can the listener stay connected with the team at Advanced Agrilytics?
I think probably the best way to go about that is look on the web at advancedagrilytics.com, and there'll be a contact your local representative, or you can contact us directly through that site.
Dr. Kess Berg, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Advanced Agrilytics, right here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brent Barnett.